Okay, this video tutorial is about working with the Infinity II Loom a little more. I've had some people ask me, well, how do you work with it? You know, it's a pain to work with. I can't figure it out. So I've done at least 2 blankets on it. I've done a dishcloth, small dishcloth, and a small spot on it before. And I have my scrap blanket on it right now. So you're pretty much going to cast on like you would do any other normal loom. The Nifty Knitters, Martha Stewart, whatever. Just cast on your normal row. I'll say, so you should already know how to do that. I'll say, but say you already cast it on, it's easy to wrap, and now you're like, well, now I need to knit or purl, what am I going to do? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a knit row. What I tend to do is there's 2 ways you can handle wrapping this thing. The first thing I would say is you have to decide, are you going to work in basically sections? Now, this ended, my last row ended on the inside, so which is pretty good because these are the ones that people are having the most trouble with. So the thing is, what you have to do, and I'm using 2 strands, which is clearly up to you, your yarn. You might use 1 strand. The thickness of yarn will determine also how you're wrapping it. Now there's 2 choices. You can wrap like a little section at a time, knit it over, do another little section, knit it over, or you can wrap all the pegs at once and then go back and knit them over. But with that, you do have to be careful about the tightness of your yarn. So we're just going to, for right now, do it the first way, and that's just simply wrapping in pieces, basically. That way you're not being overcome by this whole loom. You're just going to take it section by section and work your way around and following the S until you get to the beginning. So what I would do is if I was going in a section, I would grab my yarn, and then you're going to say, well, how do you hold this? Because you got to work the inside. Now, I'm going to hold it exactly like I normally do, whether the camera's on or not. This is how I would do it if I was wrapping it. And I'm sitting where I normally sit. This is exactly where I usually sit when I'm knitting for my projects. I only usually do the videos in the other room. This is the first time probably doing this kind of video out here. But this is where I'm normally sitting when I'm loom knitting, whether it be for a hat, a blanket, whatever. So the way you see me hold the looms is pretty much going to be the way I would do it normally. So I kind of hold it up, and I've got my hand up here, and I'm able to kind of come through. As you can see, the spot over here is kind of a good spot to rest your hand on. Then you're just going to simply wrap, trying to keep it as loose. As you see my fingers, because as I'm going around, I'm just holding it. I'm holding it loose. I'm not really going really tight with it. I'm going as kind of loose because I don't want it to be a pain to knit over because I'm doing it too tight. So I'm going to wrap whatever amount of rows I want to wrap. And you're just going to keep it loose. Like if you see the way I'm holding it, I'm like very loosely threading it. If you had a styler pen, you could use that. But I mean, pretty much I'm very loosely wrapping them around. Now I may say, okay, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to knit these over. So then what I might do, and again, it's awkward. As the blanket gets longer, it does get trickier to work with. But pretty much I do the same thing whether it's a big blanket or not. I'll just, if there's a lot of blanket, you kind of can fold up what you've done to lay it on your lap a little bit. But I've already just kind of wrapped these, and what I want to do is knit over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit over that last peg that I wrapped. That way it'll keep the stitches on there and they won't do that. Now the other thing is, you're used to kind of knitting where you're grabbing it, you know, one way. I tend to go in like that, if you can see how I'm doing it, and I knit it over. Now I'm not quite using the same tool that comes with it because that's in my other area here, so it's going to be a little tricky knitting over. So I'm knitting that one over so that the rest of them don't fall off. Now I can go back through and knit over the rest. So I'm just going to turn it, and I mean, I guess I'm lucky because I kind of have like a shelf here, so I'm able to kind of hold it up. So probably that's a plus size for me, being plus size, is that I can kind of hold it up and it will rest up here a little bit as I knit over the pieces. Now, because I don't have the one that goes with it, so I'm just using my regular Nifty Knitter one, and I'm just going down, you can see, and grabbing them and knitting it over. Going down, grabbing the one on the inside, and knitting it over. But I'm holding it up like this. Kind of think of how like a waitress might hold a tray, like, you know, those old-fashioned waitresses that hold it like this. Kind of that's almost how you can think of holding it at times, is you're working your way around as if you're holding a tray. So now I gotta find where I left off. And you're just going to be turning it to find where you left off, and just going through and knitting it over. It's better if you kind of work in and scoop up, basically. You're not going to work this way in and knit over, because it could be a little tricky. So think of it as if you have like a spoon, and you're just going to dip your spoon into the loom. So you go down, you dip it up to get that stitch, and then you bring it over the top. You kind of dip it down, grab those strands, and bring it over the top. That's the easier way. If you try going in like this is what could be people are doing. They might be coming in like this thinking they have to knit that over, which will work, but it's also kind of awkward on my hand to do that. to kind of come in like that. So that's why I hold it off to the side, use your tool like a spoon and kind of swoop it in. Swoop down and grab the loom, or grab the strand that you want to pull over. And see, that was pretty easy. So now what I'm going to do, just for the show different, I'm going to finish wrapping the whole loom and then have us go back. Now this is what's tricky. If you want to wrap the whole loom before you knit it over, you got to be careful of how tight you're holding your yarn. If you're holding it too tight, it's going to be a pain to knit these over. So just kind of keep it loose. When in doubt, loosen your grip up a little bit, or loosen the strand. And what you're going to want to do is, you can kind of push down the one you already did for when you want to go through later. And all we're going to do is make sure we're going to wrap all the rest of the pegs right now and show you how we do that. So all I'm doing is I'm just gently letting it go down my fingers. I'm not tightening it and getting tight with it. I'm just letting it loosely wrap around as much as I can. At the same time turning the loom so that I can kind of work it. Now, like I said, as you get more blanket, it's going to be more cumbersome, and you're going to have to probably fold a little bit what's underneath to get your hand in the right spot. You will find yourself probably going up through the blanket and having your hand through and just finding a spot that you can hang on to, wherever it might be. You might decide, okay, I'm going to come over here. You might decide to come in this side, wherever you can grab it to loosely, wrap it. And that's all I'm doing is loosely wrapping it. As you notice, my fingers aren't going way down. They're staying at the top of the pegs and just gently going around. There's really no tension hardly at all in my yarn. And if I start to feel tension, like if I'm starting to feel tension now, I'll hold what peg I just wrapped, come over here and pull more yarn up. The key is keep as much yarn loose. If it's loose over here, it's not going to wrap as tight, at least to me, as if you're kind of constantly pulling the yarn out. So if you keep enough yarn on your side, then you're going to be holding it. And sometimes I'm holding it like this. As you can see, I'm just holding it there. And I kind of tilt it up. And this is how I would honestly be sitting and looming this thing. I'd be having it kind of slightly up against me, and I'd have my hand up here holding it, and I would just be wrapping it around and turning the loom as you wrap around. Sometimes I'll even hold it in front of me exactly like this and just wrap around. And you may find this easier. And that's all we're doing is just wrapping around. And I'm keeping an eye on how much yarn I have over here because I don't want it to get tight. And if I feel like I'm starting to get tension, I'm just going to start loosening it a little more. As long as it wraps around the peg, you're fine. It doesn't have to be tightly wrapped. And again, I'm pulling more extra out. So then we're just going like this. And now, like I said, this would be how I'd be sitting with it. I'm just working with it like I would normally work with it. This isn't about getting really close in for you guys to see exactly. It's about you just saying, just relax with it. Don't stress out about how you're holding it. You just find the position that's comfortable. And like I said, I mean, maybe me being plus size, it's got more to lean on or something, but even, depending on your size, that could be a problem. Maybe you have shorter arms, maybe, it all depends on how you want to hold it. You just got to find what's comfortable for you. So we're going to keep wrapping, and I'm turning it as I go, as you see, which will help in the wrapping process. Just gently turn it, and we're going to wrap all these around. And then after I do this row, I'll show you how I do a knit or a purl row. This is just like the simple E-wrap, kind of like knitting. I'm going to show you how I do the purl, because that's obviously a little tricky, but the effect is cool. So we're just making sure you get all of them. There has been times I've accidentally missed a peg, so that's where sometimes working in sections is a plus, because then you can make sure you hit them all. So I'm just holding it up here, if you can see my hand. I'm just gently wrapping around, and then turning the loom as I go. You want to work with the loom, not against the loom. Which means if the loom is S-shaped, kind of think of yourself turning it S-shape. And I'm starting to feel tension again, so I hold my last one on there and I pull to get some extra strands so that it won't cause tension. Then back to holding it, and like I said, I'm thinking of it like an S, so I'm just kind of turning it and working with the loom. And just wrapping it around. And you just kind of find yourself turning it, getting it into that position that you need it to be to wrap it. The other thing with this loom I've noticed is you might need to take more breaks. Because you have to hold it so much and turn it, you may only want to do a couple rows at a time and then put it down and then bring it back up, and do another couple rows. Don't feel like you have to sit here and do 20,000 rows at once, basically. Do 4 or 5 rows, rest, and come back, because your project will be better if you're well rested when you're working on it. Otherwise you'll get annoyed at it, which I have in the past. And then we'll just kind of wrap and keep an eye on any tangles. Keep an eye on making sure your wrapping is light. And we're just going to keep wrapping, and then when we get done with this, I'll show you purling. Purling on this is actually pretty easy as long as on the outside pegs. It's when you start getting in the inside again that the purling becomes an issue. But again, you're going to work with the loom, not against the loom. So we're almost to the end here. Just gently wrapping. Like I said, it's just sliding between my two fingers. That's all I'm doing is letting it slide gently through, and I'm at the last one. And then I'm going to grab my tool, I forgot where I put it, and knit over that last one so that it will lock all those in place. Now you have two choices. You can start from here and work your way back, knitting all what you did over, or you can go back to your beginning, which is over here, and knit those over. It doesn't really matter, it's whatever way you want. So now, if you wrap it, you're like, okay, now I gotta go back and knit all those over. So you're gonna hold it, like I said, I'm holding it here, just kind of leaning it against me, not too tight, and just scooping down and grabbing those bottom strands and knitting them over. I like this loom because it does a 5-foot panel, which means if I want to do a blanket for my size or something, I'm not going to have to sew them together. That's what I like. So that's one of the, and I like the gauge on it being kind of small. I can't tell you exactly what gauge it is. I don't remember. But I like the gauge of it for blankets, just rags. And then, like I said, I'm sitting it down here and I'm just knitting over, scooping down to get the peg. Like I said, I'm going like this to grab the bottom loops to bring them up. I'm not going in at this angle and trying to get them because, like I said, it's awkward. I'm scooping down into them to grab it. So I'm scooping down and grabbing it. I'm not sure if that's how other people do it. It's just the way I did, because usually when I'm knitting, I'm usually sitting here like this and I'm knitting over. But I've noticed with this loom, it's better if I scoop. And it works up pretty fast. Like I said, because I didn't have the tension too hard, I'm able to kind of whip through this row, and it's pretty fast once you get going on it. I think I was able to do a full blanket in 2-3 weeks, but that's because I had a lot of time to work on it at that time. So, just knitting them over so I can show you the purling, and you're just turning it as you go. Like I said, even though I'm looking directly down at these, and I could knit it like this, where I'm scooping on the bottom up, it'll still work. But because of this loom, I can do it that way when I'm on the outer pegs, but the inner pegs work better if you scoop down and pick it up. So down, over, or under and over, depending on how it feels comfortable for you. On the outside, but I'm just doing the and because we're going to purl next, I'm not pushing these down after I knit them over, because they're better to be up closer to the top of the peg anyway. Like I said, I'm not even using the right tool that came with it. It came with a different, shorter hook tool. So you may even find that maybe for you, you need to switch it out. I do like the tool that came with it, but this is what I had closer to me, and it seems to be working good too. You may find that a Nifty Knitter one works better because of the longer hook area. The one that comes with it is shorter, and I know I've showed that in a video before. So you may like using a Nifty Knitter one because it's longer. And it still grabs them just like the peg it had. So that might be a plus too. Maybe, you know, that could be an issue you're having, is maybe the tool's not working. And then you get into this corner. As you see, notice that I started turning it more because I need to do this peg right here. So I'm just scooping down to grab it. And then I'm turning it again. I mean, basically it's turning it and working with the loom. Don't work against it, work with it. So if you see a curve and you're like, okay, I'm starting to get that inside curve, well, then you're going to need to turn it to follow that curve better. And as you see, I'm just holding it up more. It's wherever you can get that angle. So that's all it is just finding and working with that curve. And as I'm working this curve, I can slowly start turning it this way, and then I can start going like this and just hooking down. I mean, you could prop it on your leg. I don't know if you can see that exactly. And I'm just resting it on my leg and knitting over. Still holding up here. And so the purling is a trickier part, and this knitting isn't too bad. So that's, like I said, one, make sure you got the right tool. Don't assume that just because that tool came with it, that's the one you have to use. Because really, it's whatever works for you. To me, there's no correct way to do anything. Like, I didn't realize it was going to work this well with this. It just was the tool I had next to me. Because I didn't want to get into my sewing kit to get the one that came with it. So I'm just using what's next to me. And this seems to be working pretty fast. Probably because it's got that longer area. It's not as big and bulky. We're almost to the end here. The end's here someplace. Alright. Here we go. We're getting to the end. Rows take a while. That's why I'm saying with this kind of loom you may find yourself wanting to take more breaks with it. Okay, but we're almost getting to where I can show you the purling. Like I said, I'm scooping down. Now the only thing I don't have for my camera right now, or this camera doesn't have a remote control. So when I'm actually done with this, I have to lean forward to shut it off. So, and the reason you're seeing strands like this is because of where I tied the colors together. But this was just my scrap blanket idea. This was like, well, I have extra yarn. Let's just work it. It might be a scrap shawl, maybe, instead of a scrap blanket. It's, until I decide I need this loom for something else, that's what I'm going to do. This is just talking about working as a knitting and purling. Casting off is tricky as well. I can probably do that as a separate video when I'm ready to take this off. I just wanted to take the time to show you the knitting, how I maneuver it when I want to knit a row, when I want to purl a row, to actually see someone using it versus most of the time with tutorials, they're going to have it on the table, and sometimes you can't see it really that well, or it's not being used. It's not like it's not being used correctly. It's the fact that they're using it in a way to showcase how to use it, which is great, but they're not sometimes showing you how you need to exactly configure it. So now we're going to do a purl row. Like I said, this isn't too bad for purling when you're on the outer rows. It's when you start getting in here that, again, you got to work with the loom. You got to kind of go with the curve. And I'm not going to show how to cast this off. I'm sorry, I will do that in another video when I'm ready to cast this off. This is the only loom of this I have, so this is the project that's on it, but I want to do a little, kind of like, if you're working on a project, this is what you do. And then later on, when I think I'm about ready to cast this off, I'll show you how to cast off. It's just doing the chains in between, like we've done on other projects, but it can be kind of tricky because of the amount of pegs you have to cast off. But anyhow, back to this one. So now you've done the knitting, and now you're like, well, how are you going to work this for purling? Purling is an easy kind of stitch to do. It's just the outside here is going to work with us best, and the inside is going to be the tricky part. So we're just going to go ahead, and you should know how to purl at this point, but and this is how I would sit to purl for this. So I'm not going to worry about getting the right camera angle for you to see what I'm doing. I go down down the peg, and then I'm pulling the other one up through to make a loop, and then I put it back on. So it's going down and then swooping the last one up, or scooping it, I should say. So it's a down and scoop motion to bring up that loom loop. And so I'm going to quickly do that, and then I'm going to get to the inside pegs that are usually the trickiest. And what I'm also doing, if you notice, is as I'm doing it, I have my fingers here. So what I'm doing is I'm using this finger to push that strand up to grab it and then get it back on there. So I'm kind of using this finger to help guide the yarn that's underneath it. I wouldn't let the price of this loom or the workability of it discourage you. I mean, it's something that is an investment. It's something that you really have to think of, how often are you going to use this. I know I plan on making more blankets with it, so I know that for the cost, which I don't want to say the cost right now because it may have changed, but at least over $40 for this loom, I have to outweigh the cost of what I want to make on it versus the price. It's so hard because there's so many looms out there. Like I said, I'm just working around the edge, and I'm just turning it. I'm working with the loom of how the curve is going with the purling. And once I get to the inside, when I get over here, you'll see that I have to hold it a little trickier to do, but it is possible. Like I said, all I am is sitting on my couch. And this is where probably a lot of people are doing their projects. Just sitting on the couch, usually watching TV, some sort of loom project in my hands, and then you just kind of work it. Okay. Like I said, I'm using this other finger right here to help me kind of guide that yarn, because as I said, I'm scooping down, and I have this finger that's kind of helping me push that yarn that I want to use up. So that's just it. The more, it takes practice. It's not something that I was that fast with in the beginning. I got irked at in the beginning, but I love the end results. Burnett Baby Blanket, the thick Burnett Baby Blanket, is really awesome on this loom. It's really thick and it is tricky to work with, but the end result is so pretty. I actually have a picture on my Facebook channel. It's like a peachy colored and white blanket. You should really check that out because it's really beautifully done, and that was done on this loom. And there's also another one I did with Lion Homespun that was done on this loom as well. That came out really well. And it's really tricky when you have the cut strands, because I'm noticing that there we go, it's not working right because of some strand I had. What is this problem? My goodness. That's what happens when you get strands that are just from cutting it, or when you tied stuff together, because I just pieced all this stuff together and then decided to work with the yarn. So I was just re-putting that on there because it wasn't cooperating. Okay. Alright, we're getting almost to the part that's tricky. So you really want to, again, make sure that you pull yarn out, because the idea is to keep it as, loose as you can. And again, working on the inside here is what's going to be the trickiest with the purling, but doable. You may also find that if you put a pillow on your lap, that this will be up a little higher, which might also relieve some tension in your back. I've had to do that before. I do have issues with my back, so sometimes I have to put a pillow on my lap and then put my loom project, whether it be this or a different one, on top of that, just to give me a little more height and less of like the hunched overness of loom knitting. Okay, we're almost getting to the tricky part. But again, so now I'm going to lay this kind of on the inside, because I'm going to have to work in this tricky part. Like I said, I'm holding it like I would normally hold it. That's why I'm not worrying about you seeing exactly what I'm doing over here. I'm just doing the purl stitch, which probably most people know. If you don't know it, I have a video about it. I just want you to see somebody actually sitting down, working with this loom, how it gets maneuvered, and how you can work with it. Now, I'm only 5'2½", so my arms probably are kind of short, so probably if you're somebody that has longer arms, this inside might not be as tricky for you. Okay, so I'm trying to do this last tail ends just before that curve hits, and again, I might have to maneuver back again. Alright. So now it's getting to the point where it's the inside, and it's this inside parts on each one that become the tricky part, because you really have to maneuver yourself. So you have to figure out, sometimes I'll just try to lay it down, be like, okay, is it going to work here? Is it going to work there? And it really is spotting it. And this time, I need to lay it a little more at an angle so I can see the pegs. So sitting on my lap more this time to work that inner part. But it's well worth it. I mean, it's definitely time consuming if you decide you want to do a knit row, purl row, the garter stitch combination. But you shouldn't totally let what you have to do affect that. I mean, I'm slowly trying to get more into more difficult projects, but still at the same time I like to keep stuff simple. After all, then I call myself Simply Intertwined, so I do try to think of the simplest way, and I want to keep things as simple. So really, what I'm doing is I'm just working it around. Again, it could be because I'm plus size, I have a little more cushion to lay it against, but I'm sure even if you're not a plus size girl, you can just kind of lay it against your chest and then work it. And then you're pretty much, because it's like this, I can pretty much work the inside, and it's not as bad. Okay. I mean, it all depends on the yarn you're working with too. And again, I'm turning it because I'm getting ready to do this curve. And I'm checking how much yarn I have, because you don't want to have to be pulling it too much. And this becomes pretty much a long process. This is showing you basically, as I'm talking, doing 2 rows on this loom, how much time it does take, whether you're knitting or purling. And again, I'm just adjusting it as I go. That's all you have to do, is just figure out what works for you, what's comfortable for you. Is it having it up higher? Is it laying it down lower? And again, as you get more blanket underneath you, you may be tucking things a little more, folding it. Oops, sorry about that. Let's move this back over here. Okay, I hit it with my foot. So as you can see, I'm just holding it, trying to figure out exactly, excuse me, how I need it to work those angles. Now I'm getting close to this curve, so I'm just turning it to work that way. This almost looks like I'm holding it like a guitar. Well, whatever works. I've never held a guitar hardly ever in my life, probably, but I imagine that's how you'd hold it, and just working along. The tricky part is making sure if you're using two strands that you get both of them as the loop. And I'm just turning it again. Now this is kind of the tricky part, because now I'm cradling it almost like a baby to get this curve in here. So I got it kind of resting on this arm, but at the same time, I'm just using my fingers to help guide the yarn that's in there so that I can swoop down and get it, and then bring my arm around to grab it. I mean, it looks like it's a cumbersome thing to use, but again, it all depends on what works for you. I just hope doing this video and having you see somebody actually work with this loom, how it gets maneuvered around, I'm hoping it doesn't discourage you to buy one yourself or to get one at some point if you have the extra money. Because it just takes some time. I mean, you're going to find yourself, I mean, there's some stuff, like I got the Martha Stewart looms and I'm getting ready to practice with them more. And already there's a couple things I like, a couple things I don't like. So, and what I like or don't like might not be the same as somebody else. So, and yes, I'll be doing videos with Martha Stewart looms once I get a little more practice and everything to see how well I like them and stuff. And now, as you can see, I'm holding it this way because I'm doing this curve down here. But I'm just going to slightly turn it and adjust the part underneath so it's lay it flatter if I'm able to. Okay, and checking how much yarn I have. And like I said, because the inner corners are what takes the longest. So as I'm saying, you're just working, and I'm going to be pretty much having to maneuver this the same similar way to do the curve that's up at the top. So once I'm done with this curve, then I'll probably stop this video, because what you see me doing down here is just going to be mimicked up here to finish that, excuse me, to finish the purling. It's just the idea of maneuvering. I just wanted to show what, it looks like to be working with this loom, how it gets held and everything, and just don't let it distract you from purchasing. Like I said, you're going to find yourself holding this thing in weird positions, depending on your body size, your type, if you're tall, skinny, short, whatever. It all depends on what's going to work for you. Like, I'm sure if I handed this off to my 6-foot-tall husband, he'd probably be holding it different than me because he'd be taller and everything. And that's just what's so weird about looms. It's depending on what works for you. I mean, I'm not saying body type has a lot to do with it, but, you may find, well, this just doesn't work for me, or, wait, that's too much maneuvering I'd have to do, but it all depends on what you want to make. If you think you're going to be someone that wants to make a lot of blankets, then I would highly recommend something that lets you do a 5-foot wide panel so that you don't have to join panels together, unless you like doing that. Okay, so we're just working that last little curve, and again, what I'm doing to work this curve, you're going to do just to work the other curve. Like I said, because you have to work so many angles, it's usually good after purling, especially, because it is a little tricky with the purling, to kind of rest it, a little bit if you need to. Usually sometimes with purling, I'll do it as a color change. Like if I've changed colors, I might do the next rows of purl. Or what I might do is just do knitting and purling at the ends, like a garter stitch, and then do the main part of the blanket as knitting, and then garter stitch it at the end to help with curling a little bit. Okay, so we're just getting ready to come around the edge, and then that'll be it for this video. Just showing you how to work the loom a little more. Well, I should say a visual of how to show you to work this loom. Okay, come here. That strand caught in there. Okay. Alright, and then you can turn it because you're on this last little curve. Like I said, it's usually better to swoop down whether you're knitting or purling. And then again, we're back to the outside, so it's going to be a little easier. And then basically what you saw me do to work the other curve is what I'm going to do the other curve over here to get it on the inside. And then probably what I would do is either curl, knit my way back or purl my way back, whichever design you're doing. But that's just a little bit on how to use the DA looms, how I turn it, and like I said, the way I was turning it is the way I would normally do it, whether I was on video or not, just to show you a little more of this so that you don't get discouraged. And if you have any other questions, please let me know, and I will try to find the answer or figure it out. Like I said, I will do a video about casting this off to show how that process works when I get this process a little done. But this is just a little more of a review of how to work with this loom. Casting it off is going to be similar to taking off like a straight loom with chains in between typically to keep the stretch the same. But you're doing the same thing as with knitting and purling. You have to maneuver this the way you need to. So if you are interested in seeing that type of video, let me know, and so that I know when I'm getting ready to stop this, that I should definitely take a video of it, which I think I would do anyway. So that's all this is about. How I did a knit row, how I do a purl row, how I turn this, maneuver this, where I place my hands, all that to just kind of get a better idea. So I hope you enjoyed.